Hi everyone, I'm Abby Mason, co-president of the Quinnipiac National Lawyers Guild, and I first want to thank you all for coming here today. We founded this chapter of the National Lawyers Guild this past June and are super excited to bring events like this one to our campus. Something that struck me personally this summer was how can I use my privilege as a law student to support social justice movements, including the movement fighting for Black lives in the wake of the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. I felt my legal education needed to be expanded far beyond what I was learning in the classroom, and that I should be able to be an advocate in a more concrete way than just being aware and engaged. After talking about my concerns with my professors, I was encouraged by Professor Linda Meyer to become trained as a legal observer and came across the National Lawyers Guild. Coming from the South in the University of Virginia, which suffered through the Unite the Right rallies of 2017, I was surprised by the need for legal observers, even here in Connecticut. I saw that the issues I protested against in undergrad were almost just as profound as they are in the South. During my first time legal observing here, my friends and I witnessed this need firsthand as we took notes of protesters being taunted by law enforcement and threatened by dogs. We can watch the news, we can educate ourselves, and we can stand in solidarity, but there is no replacement for being physically involved in activism. Many of us came to law school to help people and to change lives, but sometimes we lose sight of what we can be doing outside of the classroom. The National Lawyers Guild is an organization of lawyers, law students, and legal workers who serve the people and challenge precedent, going beyond just a discussion of what's in the bar exam. After this summer, and especially after taking critical race theory with Judge Angela Robinson, I've been pushed more to ask the tough questions in class, such as, how does this law really help everyone, or does this perpetuate economic and social disparities? Learning about the impact of the law and how to challenge it is just as important as learning what the law is. We brought the National Lawyers Guild to our law school this summer, and we want to inspire our peers here today because law students need to put themselves out there, hold each other accountable, and challenge what we believe being engaged really is. We hope to bring more events like this one to campus to reach these goals and to reshape our definition of legal education. I hope today, whether you're a student, attorney, professor, or just a community leader, that this presentation empowers you to become a better advocate and reignites that spark to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Hi, everyone. I'm Hope Estrella, the other co-president of Quinnipiac's National Lawyers Guild. As members of the National Lawyers Guild, we believe in the right to protest and get in good trouble, as Congressman John Lewis would say. It is vital to the creation of meaningful, progressive change to be student activists. This summer, all of our organization's founding members were at protests for the Black Lives Matter movement. Protesting for something that I believe in is one of my proudest memories. As I think about the protests this past summer and what I was willing to sacrifice myself, I am amazed by the activists of the past. What Dr. Lafayette and his friends accomplished with their bodies and their futures on the line is inspiring to me. As students today, and particularly as law students, our role is to be a catalyst for change, just as they were before us. In addition, this past summer, I was also lucky enough to have Professor Ford as a professor for my business organizations class. At my first protest ever to protest the death of George Floyd, another student and I missed Professor Ford's class because the protest took longer than we expected it to. I emailed Professor Ford in a panic, worried that I would get a mark on my attendance and grade for participating in a protest. Instead, she responded that we were excused and that she would have attended the protest herself if she could have canceled class. Later in that summer, Professor Ford even offered to give out her phone number to students who were protesting, and so we all wrote her phone number on our arms when we went out in case we needed help or were arrested. At Quinnipiac, many of us take for granted the rights that have already been won for us. But we have to remember that other people paved a path for us, and we must continue to pave the path for the next group to come. Thank you so much for joining us to learn from two amazing civil rights leaders. We are honored to be hosting Dr. Lafayette and Professor Ford, and we would like to thank our advisor, Professor Sheila Hare, who has helped us with this event, and we would also like to thank everyone who is joining us today. In addition, we would like to extend a huge thanks to the Black Law Student Association for partnering with us, especially their president, Camille. I wish that we could see all of your faces and be in person, but we truly appreciate you all coming out for this webinar. We will be taking questions and comments during the program. You can put them in the chat, and they'll be answered at the discretion of the speakers. At this time, I would like to introduce Dean Brown, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Hope, and thank you, Hope and Abigail. I'm very pleased that Quinnipiac Law School has an active chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. It's a great addition to our community, so thank you for that. I also want to thank Professor Marilyn Ford and Professor Sheila Hare for your constant support of our students. It means so much, not only to our students, but to those of us, your colleagues, who try to follow your great examples. We are incredibly fortunate to have with us this evening Dr. Bernard Lafayette and former Mayor Omar Neal. I know it would be such an understatement to call Dr. Lafayette a trailblazer. I think Hope sort of used this metaphor just a moment ago, and I was thinking about it in preparation for this evening. I really hope that the students who are listening to this conversation will think about the role of a trailblazer, how Dr. Bernard Lafayette has walked this path, how he's left marks for others to follow, but also how over time the trail can become overgrown if we don't care for it, how the marks on the trees can become faded if we don't continue to refresh them. And students today listening to this conversation, organizing this conversation, and I'm so proud that you've done that. I hope you'll think about the way you also are trailblazers for those who come after you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the president of our Student Bar Association, who is, for those of you outside of law school context, he is the president of our student body, George Morgan. Thanks.
Thank you, Dean Brown. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this amazing event. The SBA not only endorses this event, but we also celebrate this event. We celebrate this event because it addresses the sacrifices of the activists and the sacrifices of citizens. Personally, I believe our society has retrogressed in a way that does not reflect the efforts of those that sacrificed and came before us. And that is why we're here tonight, to discuss those sacrifices and to discuss those amazing people. To NLG and Balsa, thank you for letting me be a part of this. And I'm going to hand it off to the president of the Black Law Student Association and a dear friend of mine, Camille Lavach.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Abby and Hope, for having Balsa co-sponsor this event. It was really nice and that you guys thought of us, and I'm grateful to be a part of the event. I have the pleasure today of introducing our two panelists, Dr. Marilyn Ford and Dr. Bernard Lafayette. In addition to being Balsa's faculty advisor, Dr. Ford is a distinguished and beloved professor at Quinnipiac University School of Law. In addition to teaching various law school courses, she's continued to practice law and volunteer in her community. She's received various honors, including the Presidential Award from the Bridgeport chapter of the NAACP, the Connecticut Bar Association's 2016 All-Star for Legal Educators, and is listed as the 100 most influential people in Connecticut. She's been friends with Bernard Lafayette for over 40 years. Dr. Bernard Lafayette, Jr. is a civil rights movement activist, minister, educator, lecturer, and an authority on nonviolent social change strategy. Dr. Lafayette was a founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and a leader and participant in the sit-ins of the 1960s, the Freedom Rides, the Selma voting movement, and the March from Selma to Montgomery, along with John Lewis and others. He was a national coordinator of the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. He worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and is the current chairman of the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization that was led by Dr. King during the Civil Rights Movement. Since the end of the 1960s, Dr. Lafayette has devoted his life to his final marching orders from Dr. King in 1968 to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Dr. Marilyn Ford. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone who has actually preceded me. I'm not going to call names, right? I'm just going to get into it. So I am so grateful that you all have invited me to participate in this event. And when I first considered the invitation, I thought about the movement that Dr. Bernard Lafayette and other young college students initiated in the 1960s, and the movement that young people have launched in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, whose heart-wrenching final words were, "I can't breathe." In truth, in many ways, the Black community has been struggling to breathe since 1619. George Floyd's plea for life and breath expressed the collective pain of generations of Black men, Black women, and Black children in America. They expressed social and racial and economic injustice, police brutality, institutional racism, and more importantly, they were a scream for social change, not tomorrow, but now. That last statement came from my dear friend, Gloria Holmes, who I hope is watching. With the last three words he uttered, George Floyd launched a movement similar to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Spontaneous demonstrations occurred not only in the United States, but around the world. People, Black and white, young and old, gay and straight, began marching to protest police brutality and brutalizing social policies fueled by racism. And yet George Floyd's story, it's not new. It's as old as America herself. Ever since that first slave ship landed in Virginia in 1619, America has embraced racialized brutality. This was America's original sin. And no aspect of the country has been untouched by this sin for 400 years of slavery, oppression, and systematic and structural racism that followed. And for those of you who are familiar with it, that comes from the 1619 Project. Now, racism was memorialized in the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the decisions rendered by the United States Supreme Court. In their own way, each of these sanctioned systemic and structural racism. They permitted American society to develop as completely segregated and racist as it did with the sanction of law. The past few months have illuminated the injustice, inequality, oppression, and brutality that Black and brown people endure on a daily basis. The murder of George Floyd in particular was the catalyst that set off a firestorm of protest and demand for change in policing practices, dismantling systemic racism. Breonna Taylor was killed nearly 2 months before George Floyd, but her murder did not resonate as much until after his death. So with the three words, I can't breathe, George Floyd launched a movement in which young people, Black and white, as I said before, continue to protest today. They continue to protest what has happened, which has created and sustained two unequal Americans. I'm going to call it American apartheid. One Black, one white. The repeatedly televised 8-minute, 46-second video of the murder of George Floyd by police illuminated the ugliest parts of Americans' past. It has now caused us to reckon with America's racist history. It links racialized police brutality to patterns of racialized social control during slavery, when slave patrols and slave-catching militia policed enslaved people. It often teaches us to remember what happened during Jim Crow, when police brutalized those who were participating in the events that we're going to be talking about a little later, in the protests, in the sit-ins, in the bus rides. And what were Congressman John Lewis and Bernard Lafayette and other young people doing 60 years ago when they were protesting? They were trying to undo what our Constitution and what our Supreme Court and our Declaration did. So, 60 years later, young people are in the streets and they're doing it again. We're gonna hope that this time is the charm. We're gonna hope that a result of what young people like Hope and Abigail and Camille and George and so many others are doing in protesting today, 60 years after the 60s civil rights movement. We're gonna hope that we end up with an anti-racist America. We're going to hope that we no longer have to deal with the problems of the 60s. Now, Dr. Lafayette, you and other young activists during the 60s spent a lot of your time sitting on stools, knowing you weren't going to be served, riding buses, knowing you're going to be beat. You were tear gassed, You were assaulted with water from high-powered hoses. You were attacked by vicious police dogs. Women were raped. They were beaten. You all were arrested. You were convicted, and you were jailed for protesting segregation and for attempting to register to vote, to eat at white-only lunch counters, to drink water from white-only water fountains, to ride in white-only sections of buses and trains, to use white-only bathroom facilities, and some activists, black and white, were even killed in the struggle. A month or so, your good friend John Lewis passed away, and I know that was very painful because it was the same day that C.T. Vivian passed. We talked about that. During the funeral for John Lewis, President Barack Obama publicly recognized you and John Lewis when he called your names. And he talked about the courage of the two of you who were very young people at the time. He talked about you putting your lives on the line and challenging an entire infrastructure of oppression. So Dr. Lafayette, I'm sure that brings back lots of memories. And since I've known you, I'll acknowledge now 50 years and not 30. I will say one thing, as I was watching, I do recognize you, the little skinny guy with the glasses on the right, the thin head. You're not the little skinny guy with the glasses on the right anymore. Now, having said that, we just watched a clip of the Freedom Ride. We watched a clip of the destruction of the bus by fire. Portion of that clip shows you all in the church where you went for refuge. You can always go for refuge and safety in the church. Unfortunately for you, 3,000, a mob of 3,000 outside didn't think you should have refuge in the church. So I'm going to ask you a question. I have a twofold question. One, you've often talked to me about your activism and your relationship with John Lewis and how he convinced you to become an activist in the civil rights movement. Can you briefly, a couple of minutes, tell me about how he convinced you to become an activist? Then I want to talk about something in the clip we just saw.
Well, John Lewis and I were roommates at the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. I went there in 1958, and John Lewis started in 1957, and he was a year ahead of me, and we ended up being roommates. Well, we used to talk about the segregation in the South because we both grew up in the South. But at an early age, that's one of the things we had in common. We resisted the whole idea that segregation was something that was going to be permanent. We challenged it at an early age, and we wanted to see change. And we didn't want to wait around until we got, gray hair or no hair. We wanted to make sure that the change came soon. But he's the one that convinced me to go to these workshops. And that's one of the things I want to emphasize. There is no substitute for training. That's why we have West Point for the military, because you need to train leadership. And that's the thing that makes the difference. And Jim Lawson was the one that was conducting the nonviolent workshops. And I was not in favor of leaving my job, going to a workshop. But John Lewis convinced me that these workshops were very important because it could make the difference in terms of what we were able to do with the sit-ins in Nashville. So I decided I would go just to calm him down. Okay. But when I went to the first workshop, I was hooked.
Okay, now you actually have gotten into my second question. I asked you how you met him, so now you're going to tell me about the workshops, all right? So yeah. Now I'm actually getting ready to ask you about the workshops, because you've often talked to me and others about the importance of nonviolence and of nonviolence training, and I'm sure that comes out of the workshop that you were just talking about with Jim Lawson. So as we looked at that clip, we saw you and others being taken off the stools, hot coffee being poured on you, hot water being poured on you. Some people can see you were being punched in the gut. Once they got you on the floor, they stepped on you. They beat you mercilessly. Camille Lavache is on this, and we've often talked about nonviolence, and I'm going to try to get you to convert her tonight. So you all sat there, you didn't try to protect yourself at all, and you didn't fight back. I think it's important for you to tell Camille and some of the others what nonviolence civil disobedience really is? What is the significance of it? What is it?
Well, nonviolent civil disobedience is a concept that deals with not only do you ignore an unjust law, but you obey a just law.
Okay.
So while it's, some people feel that it's breaking the law, but it's actually healing the law in the broken places. So therefore, the civil disobedience means that we must be obedient for what is just and what is right, and disobedience to that that is unjust and that which is not right.
Okay, now I'm a little confused. I'm a preacher's daughter, and I believe in nonviolence, but I'd have a difficult time. As a matter of fact, I might as well be honest, I fought my whole childhood. I stayed in trouble. My daddy kept me on what they used to call the morning bench of the officer, because I was always fighting, all right? It would have been difficult for me not to fight back. So how does nonviolent training that you took with Lawson and others get you in that framework where you don't try to defend yourself?
Well, first of all, you've got to have a purpose in mind. So it's not a matter of whether you fight or you don't fight. It's what's important in your life. And that's important for me to emphasize with young people, because it happened to me, it happened to John Lewis, it happened to others who were involved. And what it basically says is that you have a purpose for your life. You're not just living just to eat and breathe and try to figure out, what you're gonna do to entertain yourself. But you think about a purpose in life, something that's worthwhile that you can give that's gonna make a difference and make life better for others. So you're not thinking about selfish things. So that gives you the motivation. Now, one thing I want to emphasize in terms of nonviolence, it does not mean doing nothing when you are attacked.
Mm-hmm.
First thing is you want to always keep your goal in mind. So the question is whether or not the actions you take, or some people react, whether that's leading you towards the goal that you're trying to achieve. So if it's nonviolence, then you have to demonstrate with your response the goal that you're trying to reach. While people are showing you how mean they can be, show how loving you can be. And of course, I can give you many examples of my own life.
Camille says she needs an example.
You need an example?
Yeah, for instance, the night that you were attacked, the night that Medgar Evers were killed, and the night that you were targeted to be killed, I can't remember the other person. I guess the night you were hit in the head, and I often thought that you're being hit in the head and that plate was one of the reasons why you were nonviolent. But why didn't you respond with violence?
Well, I drove up in front of my house, and I was in Selma, Alabama. Nobody else wanted to go, so I went. And I was at home and getting out of my car, and there was across the street some white men, one behind the steering wheel of his car and the other under the hood. So I assumed they had car trouble. But I went ahead and was getting the literature out of the back seat, and I heard this fellow coming up from behind me. I could hear the leaves cracking under his footsteps. It was in June. And I turned around, and there he was, a huge guy.
Mm-hmm.
Crew cut, haircut, sleeves rolled up over the shoulders. And I had to look up at him to see his face. And he said, "How much would you charge me to give me a push, buddy?" So I told him I wouldn't charge anything. So I quickly got my car and got behind his car and matched up the bumpers. And he was stooping down looking at the bumpers. And when I was taking him so long, I said, "Do they match?" He said, "You better come out and take a look." So when I got out and took a look at the bumpers, I had a 48 Chevrolet that Julian Bond had gotten for me for SNCC. and he punched me in the head, and I went flat on the ground in the middle of the street. Got back up again, and I looked at him, and he hit me again. I went down, got back up, still got the scars on my head. And the third time, he jumped up and hit me in the middle of my head. That's supposed to be my soft spot, but he didn't do any research because my mother would have told him that I didn't have any soft spots in my head. Okay. So when I got back up, he was shaking because he's supposed to knock me out, little skinny fella, you know, the first blow. So long story short, he started backing up and he was shaking like he was nervous. And I looked and he had a gun and he was getting ready to shoot me. So I turned my back on him and I yelled to my neighbor who was upstairs. I said, "Red, Red, Red." And Red had been to Korea and Vietnam, and he broke across the banister upstairs, you know, and with a rifle. And he was trying to get a beam on this guy. And I said, "No, don't shoot." So every time he tried to get a beam or aim on him, I'd block him. By my blocking Red from shooting him, this guy started backing up and eventually jumped in his car and took off. He was going to kill me, but if he had shot me, he would have shot his shield. I was shielding him from being killed. So while he was trying to kill me, I was saving his life with my life. So nonviolence means taking action that conforms to the goals that you're trying to reach. I was there to save lives, not to get people killed. So my point is, you have to always keep your goal in mind, and then your actions must be consistent with the goals you're trying to reach. So that would be an example. Had I tried to fight with him, he would have shot and killed me.
All right. I think you have a recruit. Camille looks like she's been convinced and converted, and she's going to become nonviolent. Now, I have read a lot and I've heard a lot from you and others about the Freedom Rides. And I know that before you all went on that second bus, well, actually, we were in the church the first time, but I know you went to second time to church, and I know you went for prayer because you always go for prayer. I know that you actually got your affairs in order. And I know, among other things, you actually wrote your will. Now, you know that I'm a PK, right? And in the Black community, PK is the preacher's kids, right? My dad was a pastor of one of the largest churches of God in Christ and a bishop. So I know how important Black churches were during the civil rights movement. I know how important they are today. I know that the Black churches were institutions where on a local, a state, and a national level, they provided places for the social and spiritual interaction on Sundays, but it was also a place for the mass meetings and the strategy sessions that were held. As a matter of fact, some of the most significant events in the civil rights movement were directly connected with the Black church. Many people don't know. John Lewis often talked about the fact that Emmett Till was that George Floyd was his Emmett Till. That's what he was saying. And many people don't realize that in 1955, when Mamie Till, a grieving mother, defied public authorities, held that open casket funeral to show the world the viciousness of racism that was actually evidenced by the horrific murder and corpse of her 15-year-old son, Emmett Till. You know, he'd been brutally beaten for whistling at a white woman in Mississippi, and that thousands of people had lined up outside the church to view that body, and that those vivid pictures of Emmett Till's body, the horrific murder, that basically ignited a movement, right? The response to his death was quite similar to the response to the death of George Floyd, right? So in the aftermath of the murder of Michael Brown, you and others came to St. Louis civil rights leaders. And again, we always did it in the church. That's where I hosted the aftermath of Ferguson and what's going to happen next, where we sat and talked with the Ferguson protesters and others in Dad's church about where we go from here in the civil rights movement. So I guess I want to ask you a couple of questions. Why were you all in that church in the clip that we just saw? That's number one. Why did you go to the church? What was the purpose of being in that church? That's going to be the second question. I'll let you answer that question first.
Well, I'm glad you're asking these questions because there's part of history that must be, you know, interpreted and understood.
All right.
But just before we get to that, I want to say that the night that I was attacked in Selma, Alabama was the same night, as you mentioned, that Medgar Evers was killed. But there was a 3-state conspiracy. The FBI came and told me that they planned to kill me, and they planned to kill Medgar Evers, and they planned to kill Ben Elton Cox in Louisiana the same night. So it wasn't just a one thing.
Person attack.
It was a conspiracy.
Okay.
The reason we were at the church is because the original Freedom Ride had a schedule of different places where they were going to stop.
Okay.
And one of the purposes of the Freedom Rides was not only to desegregate the buses and the bus stations, but the purpose of the Freedom Ride was also to give inspiration to these local communities. So the original plan was to go to the church and to have a mass meeting and to let people get inspired, but then take the bus the next day. See, John Lewis had the schedule because he was on the original Freedom Ride.
Right. Okay. So you were there to inspire
That's why
people.
we were in the church. Yes.
Okay. So you had no idea that you're going to become hostages in the church?
No.
Okay.
And we were afraid that they were going to throw a bomb in the window once they knocked the window out the church, like they did the bus.
The bus. Okay. All right.
So that's why we were afraid.
And then they would have gotten the Freedom Riders. They would have gotten Martin Luther King. They would have gotten Andy Young. I saw they'd had the whole movement. Okay.
Exactly.
Now, you also told me and others that you made your wills before you all left, I guess, on that second ride. Did you all discuss that, your wills? I mean, you're 18, you're 19, you're 20, 21-year-olds. You're actually writing your wills and giving up your possessions? Okay.
Well, when I wrote out my will, leaving the American Baptist Theological Seminary, I left all my books and things, you know, and clothes and things to other students who were there.
Okay.
Who didn't go on the Freedom Ride.
Okay.
However, when I returned, my things were gone.
Okay. That's what happens when you write a will. Talk to some lawyers, okay, next time. Okay,
I will not see them again.
Okay, fine. We'll talk to some lawyers. Okay. All right. So at any point, we're going to watch another clip, but at any point during the Freedom Rides, did any of you all discuss abandoning the rides and returning to your lives as college students on a safe and secure campus? Did you ever think about it? No, not even a bit.
In fact, more students joined us.
All right. Okay, so you took the ride, you're now leading the second group. The second group is on the bus. The first group's been firebombed. The second group is headed to Mississippi, and we're now getting ready to see the second clip. So actually, as I look at that clip and look at you all, I look at Abigail, I look at Hope, I look at Camille, I look at George, I look at the young people today who are protesting. They're around the same age that you all were at the time that you all were riding the buses, doing the sit-ins and doing your other protesting. Now, most of them have not been beaten the way you all were beaten, and most of them don't have contracts out on them, but they've been sprayed with tear gas. I should say some of them actually have been beaten, and some of them actually have been arrested. And most of the protesters today have remained, I would say, peaceful, and they obey civil disobedience the way that you all did. But today, there have been infiltrators more than there were during the 60s. People who have actually come and have caused problems and have made either the Black Lives Matter or the Ferguson protesters or others look like they had resorted to violence. What advice would you give to young people today about continuing to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience, no matter what they encounter in their protest?
Well, one of the things that we did and we were trained to do was to have what we call marshals.
Okay.
In the marches and demonstrations, we had people who were designated for different things. And everybody didn't do all the same thing. There were some that were leading the marches and demonstrations, and there were some who were marshals. some dealt with the media, the press, like Diane Nash. Her job on the sit-ins in Nashville and also on the Freedom Ride was to be our contact with the media and to explain what we were doing and to cultivate that support, because our whole idea was to win people over. And the media plays a very strong part in helping to convince people that this is the right thing to do and they could participate in how they do it. So the Marshals made the difference. And we had people who tried to break loose and do things, even in our sit-in movement and the Selma March. Like, for example, there's a picture you would see in the museums with a fellow with a flag, and he's a black fella, and he has a tam on, a beret, backwards, and he is in the front of the line, right in front of Mrs. King and Dr. King and Abernathy and all that. His name is Lamar McCoy. Lamar McCoy was the head of the vice lords from the west side of Chicago.
Well, that's a gang.
I trained the gang members to be marshals on the Selma March. Some people don't even know that. Because I knew that these gang members, once we got the Chicago movement started, they were going to play a role, and the role they were going to play was the gang, what gangs do. So I had to give them a special role. So I trained them, and Selma was the boot camp for the Marshals, vice lord from Chicago.
Oh, so your Marshals were gang leaders. Okay, that is very informative. Okay, very informative. So the young protesters today have been sprayed, as I said, some have been beaten, some have been arrested. Some of them who actually went to, well, I'm not sure how many have actually gone to jail. I didn't get any calls, so I don't know if any were arrested and went to jail. But I know that in your group, lots were arrested, lots went to jail. So I'm gonna take a minute here and go off script. I'm gonna do a plug. My son recently wrote a book about Constance Baker Motley, a very courageous civil rights leader, a Black woman and a lawyer who actually happens to be from Connecticut, which is where we're broadcasting tonight. She's not been properly credited for all that she did during the civil rights movement, but I'm just going to talk about one thing. Fortunately for you and many others, Constance Baker Motley, who was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund against the will of others, took up the cases of those of you, all of you all who were arrested in the sit-ins, all of you all who were arrested in the bus rides, freedom rides. She took those cases all the way to the United States Supreme Court. She won those cases, probably the first Black woman to actually argue cases in the United States Supreme Court, 10 of them. She won those cases. All of the convictions were thrown out. So you all have, I guess, good records. You're not criminals anymore. So I just wanted to give a plug to Constance Baker Motley because she doesn't get her credit. I have to ask you, did you know about Constance Baker Motley when you were actually protesting?
Yes, I did.
You actually knew about
it? Depends on her, yes.
Those
kids from Birmingham.
Okay. Well, actually, the Birmingham movement, you know, actually King, anything that happened during the civil rights movement, many people, not taking anything away from Justice Marshall, but when he went to the bench, Connie did it all. So, Constance Baker Motley has been very important in my family. And basically, I knew what she did for you all. And when I was in school, lawyers also came to our rescue when we were arrested. I was going to talk about various individuals, talk about Hayward Burns, National Conference of Black Lawyers. By the way, I think Lennox Hines, who was our fearless leader when we were protesting, is actually on this webinar. So I try to pay it forward. And students had mentioned at the very beginning that Professor Hare, I, and others volunteered to represent the students when and if they were arrested and hopefully not jailed, and that's the reason why. Now, some of the concerns that young people have, and particularly law students, it's about their careers. What impact will arrests and convictions have on their ability to complete their education? How will their protest activity affect their ability to take a bar exam in different states? How will it affect their job prospects, their professional career goals generally? Did you think about those things in the 1960s?
Yes, I honestly did think about those things, but fortunately, we were able to have avenues open up for us because of our involvement in the movement. And there were people in higher education who really accepted us and made a big difference. I was accepted at Boston University Law School, and that was during the Kent State situation. So we had to close school down even. But I later on, was accepted at Harvard University because I wanted to fulfill, certain things that that signed in my life. But what? 2 weeks after I was accepted at Harvard University School of Education, they put me on the admissions committee. So not only did they accept me as a student, but I ended up being a staff person as well, an assistant professor. So my point is some advantages as well.
Okay, so you're saying in your case in particular, there were some advantages. All right, I'm not sure what will happen with our students. I'm not sure, if Harvard is gonna take them, and put them on the admission committee. But I do know that it is a serious concern. It's a serious issue for students. And I guess that each student will have to make his or her own decision about that. I know that Hope and Abigail made theirs this summer, and they were willing to, possibly even get a lowered grade to stand up for what they believed in, and I appreciate that, all right? So we're in the midst of an election season. I think everybody knows that. Probably one of the most important elections since Reconstruction. Black and brown people are concerned about all kinds of issues of disparity in economic circumstances, healthcare, especially COVID-19, where we have been on the front lines and had sustained deaths, illnesses disproportionately. Concerned about disparity in educational opportunities for children, policing in communities of color, and on and on and on. Voting is extremely important this year. And it's not about your political party. I'm simply saying, don't squander the right vote. The next clip we're gonna look at is gonna be the last clip. It's gonna focus on events that led up to Bloody Sunday, the Selma to Montgomery March, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is where we're gonna end, right? I'm gonna ask you to briefly talk about James Orange, whose name I really was not familiar with before I met you, and the mass meetings and what his I guess, incarceration did about leading toward the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson, and then encouraging or inspiring you all to get on that bridge and to walk on to Montgomery. So I'm gonna ask you to give us a little of the history of that before I ask George to start the third clip. So tell us a little bit about Selma, James Orange, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and then lead us to the bridge.
Well, Perry County was one of those counties where we had strong participation and support for Martin Luther King and his organization.
Okay.
So James Orange was a staff person who was assigned by Hosea Williams to go to Perry County and work on voter registration. It was adjacent to Dallas County, where Selma is located. And I was over in Dallas County, and James Orange was over in Perry County. And James Orange was in jail. And the people there in Perry County was afraid of what might happen to him, because a rumor had gotten out that they were going to take him out of jail that night and, take his life and do something terrible. So the night march came as a result of James Orange being in jail. So after the mass meeting, people went down to the jail so the media, could be there, and they would draw attention to James Orange incarceration.
So you were leading the Selma movement down there. James Orange was in his county, and you all were going to the jail to get James, well, not to get him out of jail, but to protect him, to make sure he's not killed.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was Jimmy Lee Jackson's mother who was being attacked, and someone told him that while he was off nearby. And so he went to protect his mother.
Okay.
As a result of that, that's when he was killed.
Okay.
Now it was Jimmy Lee Jackson's death that sparked the Selma March. So next to Perry County, okay, and the whole idea was to march to Montgomery. The purpose for going to Montgomery was to see the governor.
And you were going to take Jimmy Lee's body to the governor.
Yes, that was the original thought, that they would take that body. And the reason why, because it was an Alabama state trooper that killed Jimmy Lee Jackson. Not a local sheriff and not the local police, but the state was involved here.
So a state trooper shot Jimmy Lee Jackson in the head, cold-blooded murder. And you all, Omar, I see you shaking your head. You want to make a comment before we go to the third clip?
No, I mean, that's the same thing that's happening before. If you notice that most of the movements were sparked by some police misconduct. And that's the recurring theme, even with George Floyd, and the list goes on. But it's always police misconduct to African-American or people of color primarily that sparks a movement towards bringing justice for all.
Okay. All right. So having Dr. Lafayette, it's difficult for me to call you Dr. Lafayette. I've known you so long. Is there anything else we need to say before we start this third clip? So Jimmy Lee has been murdered by the state trooper. We're going to start the clip. That was powerful. You know, I've always admired you. I've always admired C.T. Vivian, Diane, and all the rest for all that you've done. I was younger, so I looked up to you all, and I know that we have the Civil Rights Act because of what you did. We've just seen that we have the Voting Rights Act because of what you all did. And I guess I'm getting a little sentimental now. You lived all of this. You've lived the 60 years after. What would you like to say, or do you have any comments at all about the Voting Rights Act, about voting suppression, potentially in the upcoming election, and about anything else about exercising that hard-fought won right to vote?
Well, it's important for people to look to the future. While we're struggling with these problems today, and we're remembering, because it's hard to forget what we had to go through yesterday. And we lost a lot of people. But there are some leaders who I want to emphasize when we talk about the right to vote.
Okay.
And one of them would be Mrs. Amelia Boynton.
I think, didn't you do her eulogy?
Two of them, yes.
Okay.
And
two of them. Okay.
Well, they had one in Selma and
one
in Tuskegee, where she went to school and where she lived.
And that's where Mayor Omar Neal was mayor. Okay, fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, but I'm very anxious for questions too, but I want to emphasize that in order to make a difference in the future, what we want to do is get more of our young people involved in participation in the government.
Okay.
Because the government has the power, and those people who are elected officials, they get salaries, by the way, and when they pass bills, the bills are passed to us. Okay.
Oh,
and
bills. I see.
Yeah, the bills, right. That's what
twist on words, bills. Okay, fine.
Right.
Okay, fine.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So, and the young people also, when they buy those tennis shoes, they pay taxes.
Okay.
You know, so they're paying the bills too. Okay, but they can't vote. So what I'd like to see is a duplicate of our legislative process. In other words, I want young people ages 12 to 17 to elect officials among their age group that replicates the legislature.
Okay.
And they can practice voting on bills that the legislature has. But the more important thing is the selecting of leadership, okay? And those
Cultivating
people
young
who
leadership.
represent them. Yes, so that way, because you don't get it in school. People don't want to think about absentee ballots. They don't know what to do. But I want these young people to learn, and they need to teach the older people how to fill out absentee ballots, because that's going to be the wave of the future, by the way, okay? Yes, and be able to help them do that, even though you're not 18. But think about all those who are going to be 18 between now and the next 2 months.
Okay.
Those people are going to be qualified to register to vote. And so what they need to do is have a party once a month and bring in all the people who got their voter registration cards because they got registered to vote, and they're going to have a party.
This
Okay?
is
Bring
after
in-
COVID. Okay. Mhm.
Yes, right.
You're on a campus. Okay, after COVID. Okay, we're gonna have a
Yes,
party
they
after.
can do it virtually. Yeah,
Okay, virtual party. There we go. Okay. Mhm.
yeah. And I
All
want I want the young people now to mobilize and organize these young people
Okay.
so they can do that, because they're gonna make a difference when they get involved and they know who's running. And so they vote on the people themselves who are running for office, who are going to be elected.
Okay. All right.
Not only their legislation in terms of the youth party, but also the different other parties that exist. So the more participation they have, the more they learn how to do it, and the more they're concerned about, their future. I want them
And
to
of
make
course,
a difference.
electing on the local level as well as the state level, as well as on the national level.
Absolutely.
Because Mayor, as they are, can tell us that the local level sometimes is actually as important or more important than the national.
You know, all politics is local. It always come down to the local level. I mean, obviously we have, the national and federal and the state, but it always comes down to the local where the rubber meets the road. But what's interesting is that the first step in any liberation process is that the oppressed must first withdraw their participation from their own degradation. So they have to decide that they're going to be proactive in deciding what happens in their country. And that's where the voting process takes place, where we're actually choosing people who have the empathy of the people to bring about justice for all. This whole notion of a more perfect union is to move towards justice and equality for not just a few people, but for all people. And that's what this process is about voting. If you notice that right after Jimmy Lee Jackson, the notion of what are we going to do about it other than getting angry? We're going to vote so that we can put people in who will make sure that laws are passed that protect us, that give us access to be the true and perfect manifestation of God's intent for us. I mean, that's what this whole perfect union is about. It is not having any restrictions from me being what I was purposed to be. And this is why they were willing to sacrifice their lives, right? And so to sit here next to Dr. Lafayette and him being a friend and a mentor and hear him recount these many dangerous events, it is just chilling for me. And to realize that we are continuing to see this same thing replayed over and over again, and it won't stop until we all decide that we're going to vote and remove all doubt.
Wow, okay. Well, I had one more question. And that one question was, and this is actually, it's interesting that this event was actually organized by what I would call our allies. Right? BALSA is supporting it, George and the SBA is supporting it, but it was actually organized by Hope and by Abby. And I'm going to call them our allies, our white students, okay? During the civil rights movement, white allies participated in sit-ins, freedom rides. We have the clip with them on the bus. Their lives were on the line in marches and all other forms of protest. Some were beaten along with you, and some even lost their lives, particularly in Mississippi. As a matter of fact, I often say to a great extent, the movement would not have been successful but for the murder of some white people, right? Mayor, you agree?
I agree. In fact, I think Dr. Lafayette shared with me that during the Selma movement, that more white people died than black in that movement, and so it certainly brought a lot of media attention that was part of what catapulted the movement to the next level.
And a lot of people don't know about the white people who actually put their lives on the line, who lost their lives. So that
Right.
brings me to a question. We had the white allies, and as I said, I don't believe the civil rights movement would have been as successful without some of those sacrifices. What do you believe the role is of white allies today? And I'm going to go to Mayor Omar for that, then I'll go to Dr. Lafayette.
Well, let me say this. When it comes to justice, everybody has to participate in the process. It cannot be black justice.
Okay.
Justice is justice. And so therefore, if we want justice for all have to participate in the process. You know, I mean, I interviewed, let me digress just a minute to make this. I interviewed Coretta Scott King many years ago. I was talking to her and I asked the question, what was it about the movement that did not pan out in retrospect the way that she thought it should have? Mm-hmm. And this is how she responded. She said, what I think the failings of the civil rights movement is that we gave our children the victories of the struggle, but I don't think we really gave them the struggle. And that she felt that maybe if we had emphasized the importance of not only maintaining what we had gained, but advancing the gain to institutionalize it, that it can sustain itself, then we would not constantly be having the same issues over and over again. Now the contradiction is I'm seeing these young people now, and I'm saying, well, they got it. I don't know if the previous generations have had it like this, but I think they got it. And I think since the 1960s, this is the movement that best reflects and replicates the spirit of
the young people today. Absolutely.
I think the young people of the day, I think you got it. And so that's what gives me hope. Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, I think that's the spirit of the movement, the determination that ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, and that we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. That spirit is resonating in young people. And I just hope that they get training so that they don't sabotage their own success with violence and with destruction of property and that kind of thing, but stay focused on the prize and continue to know what you want, but also participate in the process of voting so that you can put people in office who can make decisions. When I was the mayor of a city, I didn't have to go to anyone to make a decision. I was there to make a decision with the authority of the people. And so we have to put people in authority who will make decisions on our behalf.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a question of Hope and Abigail now. I have the questions that we drafted, but I don't know what you've actually got through the chat room. So at this point, I don't know if I should turn it back over to you or if I should continue with some of the questions. So I'm gonna let you all respond to me.
We have some questions. Camille is going to begin with the question.
All right, okay.
We have a question from Sarah Bassett. Does the prevalence of social media negatively or positively impact student activism?
Can I give that one to Omar since he is actually in the media?
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you hear?
You know, let me say this. I think that social media has been both good and bad, and let me tell you why I say that. It's good that people are more aware. There are people who were not so engaged in the process by watching the news and all. Now the social media allows for them instantaneously to get information and to disseminate it amongst their contacts or their relationship. And so that's positive. But I think misinformation can also be disseminated just as easily. And so it can be a double-edged sword if not used properly. But on the whole, I think social media has been very valuable in bringing awareness, getting people involved, in catapulting the notion of justice to all people, not only locally in the United States, but internationally, globally. You notice people are marching around the whole country for justice, and because they're seeing it here in the United States. And I think that is going to be good for sustainability of the movement, is information dissemination, and the social media provides that.
Thank you. We have a question from Dwayne Smith, and I think this is directed towards Dr. Lafayette. What are your thoughts on the protests across the country that are occurring? And we want to focus on the counter protests that are occurring as well.
Yes. One thing that gives me the inspiration and the confidence that we are going to sustain this movement is when I see women leaders stepping forward. So I feel that, okay, we've hit it, because I know that women, you know, they really know how to organize. They really do. And I can tell you a lot of reasons why, but we don't have time right now. But I know that things are changing to that extent. And men are accepting that leadership as well. So that's important for us to know the difference between the movement of the past and the movement of the present. The next thing is that sustainability. The important thing to be able to do is to sustain your movement. You institutionalize it and you make it a part of your life. And you, okay, don't give up. Now, in addition to that, I would also recommend that you identify a specific thing that you want changed and stick to
Like have a goal.
Have a goal in mind, a specific goal. Not everything at once, but focus now. And the way you do that is you build coalitions among people. Like Martin Luther King, he had the MIA in Montgomery Improvement Association. Okay, you had the CCCO in Chicago, Coordinating Council of Community Organizations, and you just go down the list. The Dallas County Voters League, that consisted of teachers and ministers, union people. You've got to have church people. You've got to have all these people united together, focused on that. So building coalitions and then be able to meet. That's what we were doing when we were meeting, okay, in different places. That you saw Martin Luther King there. And those were different organizations. James Palmer, you know, of CORE, the NAACP, all those people there. And that was important. One of the meetings I want to say that you saw me in the meeting that Marilyn was referring to, sitting there on the side, and you didn't see
the skinny head with the glasses, right? Yeah.
Yes, and people had their hands in the air.
Right.
I was chairing the meeting.
Ah, that's why your hand was in the air. Okay.
That's right, and they were sideways.
I thought you were batting a fly. Okay.
I want to tell you about that. That was on the Freedom Rides, and they wanted Martin Luther King to join the Freedom Rides. Now, isn't that interesting? The Freedom Rides, Martin Luther King did not get on the Freedom Rides.
Many people don't separate you as SNCC from you ultimately becoming SCLC. So the Freedom Rides were you young hotheads, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And at the time, Dr. King was still the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Yes.
I just thought I'd throw that out. So you went from being a radical to but you were always social, you were always nonviolent, but you were just on the other camp. Okay.
Right. Now what happened is they wanted Martin Luther King to go on the Freedom Rides. So there was a conflict. And so that's why I called the meeting and we all sat down together. John Lewis was there, and you can see Deion Diamond, a lot of them. And what I was trying to do is get them to come to a consensus that it would be better for Martin Luther King not to go on the Freedom Rides. There are enough of us who were on the Freedom Rides. We didn't need Martin Luther King. He would be
The
better
additional
as a
attention, right.
spokesperson, to be outside of jail and be a spokesperson for the Freedom Rides. And he was very supportive of the Freedom Rides. Now, the real reason is because Martin Luther King was already on probation in Reidsville, Georgia, because he had not changed his driver's license when he moved from Alabama to Georgia. And he was arrested. And they put him on a chain gang in Reidsville. It was President Kennedy was running for office, Senator Kennedy, and he was the one that called down and got the sheriff to give Martin Luther King bail money.
They put Martin Luther King on a chain gang?
Yes.
You know, one of the things we need to do while you...
Because he didn't change his driver's license.
You know, I've
And-
often told you one of the things I want to do with you before you lose your memory like you lost your hair is get a microphone in front of you so we can record what really went on in the civil rights movement.
Okay.
That was a joke.
Okay.
We
Well,
took it as that,
yes.
Professor Ford.
So had
And the
Martin
students
Luther
said they
King
won't
been-
help. Okay.
Had Martin Luther King been on the Freedom Rides and got arrested, he wouldn't have stayed in jail with us. They would have transferred him back to Reidsville for violation of probation.
Probation. Okay, fine. Okay.
So my point is,
Okay.
always look at things in a holistic way
Okay.
rather than a narrow way. Look at the good that people can do in different positions.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So always take that in consideration. But there's a lot I could say, but we don't have time right now.
Before the next question, I want to just make a comment of something you told me once. I think it was with you and Andy Young together. No, I guess it was you and C.T. Vivian about being on the Freedom Rides, and because buses were being blown up and people were being killed, white bus drivers were refusing to drive the buses. So you all got on the bus and the bus driver got off. Can you just tell that story about the bus driver that he wasn't going to lose his life for we'll just say the N-word?
This was in Birmingham.
Okay.
And this is when the students from Nashville decided to continue the Freedom Rides
Right.
after
Okay.
the bus was burned.
All right.
John Lewis and all the rest of it. John led the first group,
All right.
and
Okay.
they got arrested. And so I led the second group out of Nashville. Okay, we always had backup. That's
right.
another key thing. Have people in reserve. Okay, don't put all your eggs in one basket,
All right.
as the old folks say. All right. So here we were, and we tried to get on the bus to go from Birmingham to Montgomery.
Okay.
And the bus drivers refused to drive because the bus driver said that he asked us how many of us was from Coe. Well, Coe, nobody there from Coe. He was talking about CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. Then, since nobody said anything, he said, how many of y'all from the NAACP? The NAACP. Nobody was from the National White People's Organization. Okay. So then he said he had one life to give and he wasn't going to give it to the NAACP or COE. He got off the bus, refused to drive. It was Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, who got a bus for us.
All right.
And,
Okay. Okay. The students may have another question.
Yes, I have a question from our audience, and it kind of goes off of what Professor Ford was saying about your group of students being considered radicals. So this person asked the question of, what do you say to people who only believe that change can come through radical ways? For example, defunding and reforming law enforcement in this country. What are some ways do you think we can achieve this reform without resorting to uproar?
Well, I believe that we have to use our resources to our benefit. And since we have a problem with the police training, I would certainly be in favor of using some of those funds to train policemen in how to de-escalate situations or how to respond without the use of violence. By the way, we don't talk about this, but do you know at Quantico, where they train FBI agents and others and all that kind of stuff. They teach you how to go into hostage situations, teach policemen now, and disarm people who have captives. And they take off their guns and they go in and they talk their way in. They know how to do it. They need more of this kind of training. How do you de-escalate situations without, okay, the use of violence? They have that kind of training. They need to make it more widespread. That's the point we're making, and more opportunity. And by the way, you're sitting here next to a former police officer who teaches nonviolence. Okay.
Yeah. You know, it's so
maybe
interesting.
you may want to ask him that question.
Yeah. Let me tell you, how you frame the issue determines who embraced the cause. So when you use the word of defunding police, you're not really talking about eliminating police. What you're talking about is that police are asked to do things to which they are not as well equipped as other professions to do it. For instance, mental health. And so what you do is you build coalition, that's what community policing is about. Build coalitions with other stakeholders who have requisite knowledge and skill sets to address the multiplicity of issues you have within communities. Social workers, mental health workers, people who deal with people who are in very hostile spaces can be dealt with differently if you know how to deal with them. As Dr. Lafayette talked about, de-escalation, implicit bias training, effective communication, cultural sensitivity. All of those things are part of a paradigm shift of moving from warrior to guardian in terms of how you see policing. And I say this all the time, policing cannot be like Clorox, that it works real good on whites but destroy colors. That's got to be a different kind of paradigm shift. And that requires a difference in training, but also to change the culture within policing and shifting how police deal with citizens, all citizens.
And we're not just talking about this, okay? We have experienced it. And that's what he does. He trains policemen all over the country. Even with this pandemic going on, he still trains policemen. I'm talking about even in the South. How about Montgomery, Alabama?
Don't you also train all over the world?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all over the world.
All over the world.
Train in prisons as well. We got 60 countries right now that have our Alternatives to Violence program. Alternative to Violence project is in 60 countries, and it reduces the violence in the prisons.
Next question, ladies. John.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for your answers, because I think a lot of the time people conflate, the desire to have radical reform with the desire to, destabilize this nation and, kind of just be radical in that sense. So thank you for your answers, because I think that really does help clarify things for some people.
Thank you. And we need more young people running for public office, by the way.
I think George is going to accommodate us.
Okay.
You have another question?
Yeah, our next question was asked by Nathaniel Honore, and he asks, detractors are using the same language they used in the 1960s to disparage the current protests as riots. What would you say to people supportive of the causes of the protesters, but not quite the images that they see on their televisions?
Yeah, let me see if I can help. I think it was Dr. King that said, violence becomes the language of the unheard. When people feel that they are in a war, when they feel they have captured something, a lot of times what they do is they loot the property of the enemy. as they see it. It is this divide between us versus them that I think that is given fuel to that. Now, the other thing is too, everyone who participate in a protest do not have the same agenda. And I think something that has to happen that Dr. Lafayette mentioned earlier is that we need people trained even to be a protester. We need more organization in protesting and knowing what you're doing, and that the end, the means must be what you seek, and that you must use the means to get to those ends. So if I want nonviolence, then I need to be nonviolence. Whatever you want, you give that first. And I think that has to be something that has to be inculcated into the notion of protest, is that we use what we want as the basis of what we do to get it.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jordan Levin. This is directed toward Dr. Lafayette. In learning about nonviolent civil disobedience, where should I begin? Do you have any book recommendations or organizations to join today?
Yes, there's the Center for Nonviolence. They got right there in Connecticut. Yes, there's a Connecticut Center for Nonviolence, and yeah, Professor Ford can hook you up and help you to, get identified with that. It's all over, and so right there in, like I say, on the East Coast, and also there are places all around the country as well. There's a center in Selma, Alabama, for example. Okay, they're there. There's a center at the University of Rhode Island, which is there.
Actually, Bernard, Dr. Lafayette, I'm going to actually interrupt here. You actually run those centers, the one in Rhode Island, the one in Selma, whatever. And if I'm not mistaken, Victoria is on the phone. You actually ran it here in conjunction with her in Yale. Yes. So my dean is also on the phone. That question has come up. Maybe if there's real interest in it, we can talk about maybe having one even at Quinnipiac.
Oh yes, most definitely.
Since all those centers you're talking about, you run, okay? Well, the one thing I've always loved about you is that you're always sort of self-deprecating. You never say, I run them, I teach them, I am the Keynesian nonviolence. You'll say the center's here, the center's there. That's the same way I feel about people having looked at the Selma movement and your name never came up. People don't know that you actually ran the Selma movement, when the movie came out. So it's okay to say, I am the one who runs those and I am available if somebody is really interested. That's okay. Sorry for getting out of my spot, but I had to say that.
Thank you. Our next question comes from an anonymous audience member. They said, I really appreciated the anecdote about using gang members as marshals. I wonder to what extent that's something we should think about doing today. How feasible would that be? Is anyone trying that approach today?
Yes, most definitely. And young people on the streets and that kind of thing, yes. So
now, why don't you go on and tell them that you train and you're doing the training of the gang members? That's what I meant when I said, speak up, right? You want to tell them about training the gang members?
Yes, and that's one of your organized groups. And so therefore, it's less difficult to organize and to train a group that's already an organization, because they have a relationship with each other. And so all you have to deal with is the leadership, because they're the ones who give direction to the others who will follow. And the same thing in the prisons, because a lot of these people are getting out of prison, they're gang members. Okay, and my confession for today is that I used to be a gang leader myself in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when I was a young fella. Okay, and we helped to organize, boycotts, against tasty bread and tasty cake, and we were very successful in our movement I didn't know about nonviolence then, but I just knew about boycotts, you know, and protests. But so this, when I talk about gangs and I talk about all this sort of thing, it's not something that's foreign to me. I'm very familiar with it, and that's why it's not difficult for me to do it at all. But I did want to say that, yes, this would be, oh, LA, Crips and Bloods. We brought the leaders of the Crips and Bloods to the King Center. That's how we were able to stop the violence there in LA.
Oh, after Rodney King's, after that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you trained the Crips and the Bloods. I don't think these young people may not know who the Crips and the Bloods are.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there were two rival gangs in LA, and they identified by colors they had. And they used to kill you if you had the wrong color on. Okay, it was very serious. Once we trained them, and Mrs. King was responsible for that, Coretta Scott King. And when we sent them back, okay, they started doing constructive things in the community, and they hired the Crips and the Bloods to lay the tracks for the rapid transit system in LA. But back to your point, yes, I don't mind doing the training, but more important to me is to find people and train them to be trainers. So it's train the trainer.
Okay.
Okay, so that's my role. That's why you have different roles to play.
Mm-hmm.
No, a lot of the training I do is to train those who are going to do the training.
All right. Is there another question?
Yeah. So sorry about that, Professor Ford. So looking back, is there anything that you, Dr. Lafayette, wish that you and your fellow activists would have done differently?
That's a great question. That really is. And it could be on an individual level, or it could be on a group level. One of the things I'd like to see you do that we didn't do is to have a weekly television program so that you can continue to be able to reach young people and have them participate in this thing so that they can learn. Because what you're doing right now is so much needed. That's why I'm here. And it's storming outside right now here. I am so delighted to see you and the leadership that you bring to this situation and the people that you are reaching right now. Suppose we had an opportunity to do this thing at least once a week for a couple of hours on public media. I believe in journalism. I used to be the editor of my high school newspaper, won first place in the state. We were in Tampa, Florida. 4-year scholarship, Florida A&M. But I went to, American Baptist College. Yeah. But I was at Boston University. I was the editor of the comment. American Baptist College, I was the editor of the yearbook. So I believe in journalism. Those of you who are involved, let's institutionalize this. So every week.
And we also talked about social media. So, you don't have to have a TV station to create a platform or format for information dissemination. So, I mean, you could literally do this with what we're doing now with the Zoom era. You can do it right now using this same format.
Thank you.
This may be for Professor Ford, but do you think as law students, future lawyers, or lawyers, do you think that they have more of a duty to engage or maybe a different kind of duty?
I think as law students and as future lawyers, you absolutely have an obligation to engage. I can elaborate on that if you like, right? You all know that my courses are BizOr, securities regulations, etc. My heart has always been in social activism and in trying to quote unquote right wrongs and bring about justice. So I think as lawyers, as law students, you all are the ones who are trained to have the difficult conversations. And I frankly think that this generation is going to have the difficult conversations. When I was growing up, you know, Bernard, you all a little older than I am, but we were told 3 things you don't discuss. You don't discuss religion, you don't discuss money, and you don't discuss race and politics. I think your generation has to take that and turn it on its head. You're going to have to discuss race. You're going to have to discuss politics. You're going to have the difficult conversations. You're going to have to be able to lead those conversations. You're going to have to be able to make people uncomfortable in their own skin so that you can actually bring people together. So I think you honestly, and Dean Brown is on this call, and Dean Brown will tell you that as long as she's known me, she knows that I am always willing to go there, right? So I think that you have an obligation, and I think you're the perfect people because you're trained to do it. And I also think that you need to go a step further, and I think that pro bono legal services is also another obligation. I think you have an obligation to give back to the community in whatever ways you want to do it, but I think you have an obligation to do that as well.
Dean Brown, do you have any comments to this question?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Professor Ford. She will go there. And it is what we respect and love and value. But more seriously, to the general point, I completely agree that lawyers are trained. Lawyers have the ability to sort of argue both sides, to be reasoned and evidence-based, and to think about rules and policies and which are best and how they apply to the facts and what kind of biases might be impacting people's perceptions of those facts. All of that is true, and I know at Quinnipiac, we need to have more frank discussions about how these hit our own lives, how people have been impacted by racism, and how white students have benefited from white privilege. And that is a difficult conversation to have too, but we need to have it in order to make progress on the issues. So this is something I very much invite our community to take on. And I think we'll grow from it, and we will make progress in whatever way we can.
And actually, let me just add one other thing. Hope and Abigail have been just so gracious. This is not actually what they had in mind when they sent me that email over the summer about the program that they wanted to have. I knew what I wanted to do, and we just kind of turned it on its head, right? And they have come along with it. And I hope that in retrospect, they will see that I think we're reaching more, and I think we're kind of going there. But I think that they opened the door with their own activism. I don't think this is really what you had in mind. I don't think they intended to have civil rights people. I don't think they intended to have the clips, and I don't think they intended to have whatever.
We're very grateful for it.
What'd you say?
We're very grateful for it.
Okay, all right. But I think it's opening the door, and I think we're beginning the conversations, and I do know that they are more than qualified to continue the conversations and other actions as well, because it's not just the conversations. You know, they've actually been out actively protesting, and I'm sorry that Professor Hare is not on, because I think she would also be someone who could actually add to this.
Yes, thank you so much. And we truly do appreciate everything that you've done for us. The next question, we're actually going to combine two questions. One is from Charles Collier and one is from Nora Mumtaz. And I think this is for all of our panelists. What are some ways that we can engage those who see activism and social justice issues as something that isn't worth their time? So how can we get other people to engage?
I'm going to start with the mayor first.
Well, it's a statement that says a threat to justice to anyone is a threat to justice to everyone. That I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And so until we understand the interrelationship and interdependency we have with each other, then we can never be free ourselves. And so part of this engagement process is to free ourselves. Dr. Lafayette told me one time, and it made all the sense later. It didn't make sense, I must admit, when he first told me that part of what they were doing with the civil rights movement was not just to free Black people, but to free white people who were also restricted. We talked about the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and white people were relegated to the front of the bus, while Black people were relegated to the back of the bus. But both of them were relegated. So there was no true freedom for white people either. They could not go to the Black bathrooms. They could only go to the white bathrooms. They could not drink at the colored fountains. They had to drink at the white fountains. So there was restriction for them as well. So part of the civil rights movement, it was to free everybody. And so when you are talking about being free, you have to make sure that everybody around you is free before you are free.
And I'd like to make sure that you understand one thing, and that is people can change. It's hard to believe that some people, okay, but people can change. The KKK, Ku Klux Klan. The original Ku Klux Klan was not a racist organization. Do your research. The original Klan was created to go after white men who didn't take care of their children, because they believed that if the white men didn't take care of their children, then the other white men would have to take care of them. So they go after these men who didn't take care of their children, white men. Now, there was a split during the Reconstruction period. There was a split in the Klan. And that other group decided they were going to go after Black people who were elected officials. That was what they did. They split, okay? Instead of going after white men, they went after Black folks, all right? People can change. And that's what we're looking for in our movements, how we can get people to change. And one of the ways we can do that is to engage them. As lawyers, you're the perfect group. Form questions that people can think about their own positions. Think about it, okay? Hegel, thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So once people can begin to see things through the eyes of others, that's why nonviolence teaches you to not just think about yourself, because my goodness, what a frightening thing for you to think about. Suppose you had been born white. You could have been. You didn't decide that you were going to be born Black. And white people, you didn't decide that you were going to be born. You just showed up. And there you were with white, with blonde hair. What you going to do? Okay? Yeah, we're just here in the world. So my point is, we've got to look at the problem through the eyes of others, and particularly others who think themselves to be opposite.
Let me
And I'm
also-
gonna, oh, okay.
Just let me piggyback on what Dr. Lafayette said for just 1 second. We also have to change systems because I think individuals, that's one thing, but until we change systems, that fairness and equity becomes what the systems support, we will continue to have this circular conversation. So it's about systems that we have to look at, institutions and that kind of thing. So that's important as well.
And actually, I was going to say that, and then this just ended with until we're all free, none of us are free. And I was also looking at it's 6:55, and I know you all have something you want to do in your last 5 minutes. So I don't know if you want to take another question or you want to wrap up.
We're good. It's just whatever time you have.
I'm talking to the students.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Professor Ford, if you have an answer to this question that you would like to say, go ahead, because we can.
I'm okay. Until we're all free, none of us are free. Okay.
Well, thank you all. On behalf of the NLG and BALSA, we want to thank everyone so much for coming to this event. We hope that you were able to learn more about the role that we all have in creating social justice through activism and what we can learn from those who came before us. We would like to extend a huge thanks to Dr. Bernard Lafayette and Professor Marilyn Ford, and also former Mayor Omar Neal as well, and everyone else who made this event possible. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have any other questions, please reach out to us. I'm going to put our email in the chat so you can send any other additional questions. But thank you all again, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.